You are about to hear something no one alive dares whisper. A story buried beneath centuries of lies, half-truths, and silences so thick you could drown in them. It begins not in a palace, or a battlefield, or a throne room, but in the quiet betrayal between blood itself. A brother, a sister, and a secret so dark, it doesn't belong to the living. Imagine a man, trusted, loved, yet harboring a desire that twists the very marrow of his being. He betrays the only person who ever looked at him with absolute faith. And when the consequence of his actions unravels, he finds himself staring into something more terrifying than punishment, more absolute than death, the gaze of a presence that refuses to let go. He begs, he pleads, but she is no longer bound by flesh, and the ghost he awakens demands a reckoning he cannot escape. History, as you have been taught, does not show the faces of betrayal. It hides them behind stone walls, ceremonial robes, and the polite lies of scholars. But those lies are designed to cage your understanding. They want you docile, unaware, and willing to swallow the story you are fed. What you are about to learn will pierce that cage. It will plant seeds of questions that no comforting answer can ever satisfy. This is a story not about revenge, not about horror in the obvious sense, but about the architecture of control, the invisible chains that have been placed around human minds for generations. A betrayal of blood is always a betrayal of truth. And in this case, it opened a doorway, a fracture in the world, that ordinary men cannot endure without being changed. As you listen, let yourself feel the weight of complicity, the subtle terror of secrets you never knew existed. You are walking down a hallway where every whisper, every shadow, every glance is imbued with intent. The brother's act was not spontaneous. It was orchestrated, influenced by systems older than the city he was born in, older than the laws that tell you right from wrong. And when he realizes the magnitude of what he has unleashed, he understands that ghosts, real or symbolic, are patient, and they remember everything. This is the threshold. And once you cross it, there is no turning back. The brother did not act alone. Every whisper in the corridors of his life had guided him toward the moment of betrayal, subtle manipulation so refined that he did not notice the hands that pushed him. There is a pattern in these histories, an invisible architecture of corruption designed to make men fall. Institutions, families, unseen councils, they do not make mistakes. Every act of treachery, every sin committed, has a lineage. He was chosen to fail, and the failure itself was a message encoded in blood. When the sister's life ended not by chance but by design, the world seemed to fold around him, closing the doors he had once taken for granted. What he faced was not grief, it was a reflection, a mirror of the hidden rules that govern obedience and secrecy. The ghost he would encounter was not merely her spirit, but the embodiment of all the unspoken contracts he had violated. And in that presence, the comforting lies of society, morality, and law crumble into dust. He realizes too late that betrayal is never private. It echoes in dimensions most men never perceive. Her eyes, even in absence, pierce through the veils of reality, demanding acknowledgement of what was done, demanding atonement beyond words, beyond gestures. The brother begins to understand that he is no longer the master of his destiny. Every heartbeat, every breath, every memory is now haunted by consequence. He is trapped in a web spun centuries ago, one that no amount of repentance can dissolve. And yet, in that darkness, there is a lesson for those who watch. Betrayal carries an inheritance, one that reshapes the soul of the betrayer and reveals the silent mechanisms controlling life itself. This is why history hides these stories, because when a man sees the truth, he cannot unsee it. The sister's ghost becomes a teacher, a judge, a mirror reflecting the intricate machinery of human control, the quiet manipulations that cradle every decision and every thought. And it is here, in the suffocating weight of unseen forces, that the viewer begins to understand the first rule of forbidden knowledge. Nothing is accidental, nothing is trivial, and no one is ever truly free. Those who claim otherwise are themselves complicit in the grand deception. The brother's fear is not for himself, it is for the structure that made him blind, for the systems he now recognizes as puppeteers, for the revelation that freedom was always a lie. He remembers the day of the betrayal with a clarity that torments him. The air had been heavy, charged, as though the world itself sensed the fracture that was about to occur. Every word spoken by those around him, every smile that hid intention, now reads as part of a design far older than he can comprehend. The sister had trusted him utterly, her faith unshakable, Yet he ignored the subtle signals, the warnings carved in silence, the trembling hesitations in her voice, the small truths that screamed beneath layers of politeness and affection. Men like him, who are guided by ego and hidden influence, rarely see the cost of their choices until it is too late. And when he finally does, the weight crashes down like a storm he cannot escape. He finds himself staring into shadows not of this world, shadows that remember and judge, that stretch across time and space, tethered to the acts of blood and loyalty he betrayed. The ghost is patient. It does not scream. It does not demand immediate justice. It waits, learning him, cataloging the moments of weakness, the fractures in his pride, the cracks in the narrative he had built around himself. And with every passing day, it becomes impossible for him to hide, from others, from himself, from the unseen forces that have always been watching. What he learns is terrifying. Betrayal is not a single act. It is a doorway to manipulation, to control, to the exposure of all that society teaches but never reveals. He begins to perceive patterns in the everyday, sinister alignments between coincidence and design, realizing that the moment he chose to betray was orchestrated by powers he cannot name, powers that operate behind facades of normality. His mind, once proud, begins to fracture, because the deeper he falls, the more he sees that nothing is what it seems. The sister's ghost whispers in forms he cannot fully hear, messages encoded in memory, in objects, in fleeting sensations, teaching him that every human action is a node in a system of influence older than civilization itself. And it is here, in the trembling intersection of fear and revelation, that the first lesson becomes unbearable. Freedom is an illusion, loyalty is a weapon, and betrayal, once committed, opens doors that even ghosts cannot close. He is no longer just a man who failed. He is a subject in a grand experiment in obedience, in moral testing, in psychological domination. Every breath reminds him that the sister's eyes are still upon him, not with anger, but with the weight of knowledge that he cannot escape, and that, ultimately, he is a mirror of what society has always hoped men would never see, the truth of invisible control, the hidden strings that govern life, and the terror of being fully awake to them. The brothers' nights became a theater of terror, where the boundaries between reality and memory dissolved. Shadows moved with intent, and silence carried voices that whispered his failures with surgical precision. Every object in his home, every corner of the streets he walked, seemed imbued with her presence. She was no longer merely a ghost. She had become the embodiment of consequence itself, a living archive of his betrayal. Men are not meant to face this kind of judgment alone. The human mind was never designed to reconcile personal guilt with systemic manipulation. And yet, here he stands, or rather, here he trembles, in the eye of a storm that was centuries in the making. Each revelation drags him deeper, showing that betrayal is only one layer of a larger architecture, a network of influence, control, and hidden agendas that stretch across generations. Families, churches, kingdoms, governments, all operate with the same silent code, feeding obedience and punishing deviation with subtlety that mortals rarely perceive. He begins to see patterns in the most mundane interactions. Who speaks when? Who hesitates? Who smiles? Every micro-expression, every gesture, is a signal in a vast psychological machinery designed to shape men, bend them, and ultimately control them without their knowledge. And she, his sister, the victim of his own ambition, has become both teacher and warden, exposing the veins of corruption that run beneath the surfaces of life. Her presence forces him to reckon with truths no one dares teach, that history itself is written to hide the mechanisms of power, that human loyalty is always conditional, and that the worst betrayal is not the act itself, but the blindness it reveals in the betrayer. He realizes, with unbearable clarity, that his suffering is a curriculum, and every fear he experiences is a lesson in seeing what others cannot, or will not, see. And while terror grips him, there is also a perverse awakening. He begins to understand the architecture of hidden control, the subtle levers that guide societies, families, and men like himself. The realization is both liberating and damning. Knowledge comes at a cost, and once you have glimpsed the machinery behind reality, there is no return to ignorance. The sister's ghost, patient and relentless, guides him down this path, and he knows now that each revelation he absorbs is reshaping him, molding him, making him acutely aware that he is a small part of a vast and calculated system, one that thrives on betrayal, obedience, and silence that he begins to understand that the betrayal was only the first act of a far larger play. The forces that guided him were older than memory, older than law, and they operate not through violence but through subtle erosion, erosion of trust, erosion of certainty, erosion of self. Every choice he thought was free had been anticipated. Every desire he believed personal had been shaped by unseen hands. And now, in the wake of his sister's absence, he feels the full weight of that orchestration pressing down. It is not enough to simply feel guilt. He must confront the architecture that made his betrayal possible. He studies the faces of those around him, the silent hierarchies, the hidden alliances. Slowly, a pattern emerges. Everything in human society is designed to keep men obedient, pliable, and unaware. Institutions, rituals, traditions, they are camouflage for control. The betrayal has opened his eyes, but with that clarity comes horror. He realizes that the sister's ghost is not simply haunting him. She is illuminating the mechanisms of human manipulation, forcing him to see what those in power have always wanted buried. And with this knowledge, the fear transforms into something more profound, an understanding that freedom is an illusion, that choice is conditional, and that the cost of awareness is perpetual vigilance. He begins to see the subtleties in everyday life. A glance too long, a word left unsaid, a gesture meant to manipulate. Each microcosm reflects the macrocosm of control, and he understands that his personal failure was just a fragment of a systemic design. It is a terrifying clarity, one that makes the familiar unfamiliar, and the comfortable suddenly perilous. The sister's presence, though silent at times, guides him further, demanding he acknowledge the hidden patterns in both himself and the world. Her ghost is a mirror, showing not just his betrayal, but the entire machinery that enabled it, and it is here he realizes the cruel truth. Humans are rarely free, and men like him, men who transgress, who betray, who think themselves autonomous, are watched, tested, and catalogued. Every thought, every choice, every desire can be used against them, or refined to serve a larger design. And the brother, broken, haunted, but awakening, comes to a single, chilling understanding. Knowledge is power, but forbidden knowledge is a trap. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Once understood, it cannot be ignored. And now, with each heartbeat, he descends further into the terrifying clarity of a world structured not for justice or morality, but for control, obedience, and the patient manipulation of men. The deeper he falls, the more he sees that the betrayal itself was a symptom, not the cause. There are forces, ancient, patient, and meticulous, that orchestrate events across generations, shaping men into instruments without their knowledge. The sister's death, the brother's guilt, the subtle nudges of fate, all of it follows a design too vast for ordinary comprehension. These are not mere coincidences, they are coded messages, a silent language that communicates through pain, loss, and regret. Every society, every family, every institution he trusted is part of this system. And the brother, once arrogant in his ignorance, now trembles before it. He begins to notice the patterns in the people around him, who hesitates, who asserts, who disappears at the right moment. He sees the invisible strings tugging at life, the hidden hierarchies that decide who rises and who falls, who suffers and who remains untouched. The sister's ghost does not speak in words, but in presence, in weight, in the relentless way it reshapes his perception. And he learns the most dangerous lesson of all. Most men live their entire lives blind, unaware that their choices are guided, their loyalties manipulated, their very thoughts influenced by powers they cannot name. He realizes that the betrayal, the guilt, and the haunting are all lessons in awakening, painful, relentless, and irreversible. The more he learns, the less comfort there is. Sleep becomes a memory, and every reflection shows him a man reshaped by truths he cannot escape. Yet there is a perverse clarity in this descent. He understands that to navigate the world he now perceives, he must learn the rules that no one will teach openly, that he must see the invisible currents beneath every human interaction. And as the ghost lingers, patient and knowing, he begins to see the architecture of manipulation with frightening precision. These are the levers that control life itself, the hidden frameworks of obedience and fear. And the brother realizes that he is a small, flawed instrument in a grander design, a design that rewards those who see the patterns and punishes those who ignore them. He is alone, yet fully aware. He is terrified, yet awake. And in that paradox lies the beginning of true understanding. The world is not what it seems, men are not what they appear, and betrayal is merely the first step into a deeper, darker reality where knowledge carries both power and unimaginable burden. The brother begins to understand that fear is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more insidious, the systematic shaping of thought, morality, and desire. Every choice he once believed was his own had been subtly guided, every belief carefully curated by layers of authority he had trusted blindly. And the sister's ghost, silent yet omnipresent, forces him to confront a truth that terrifies more than death. The world he lives in is structured to conceal, to manipulate, and to control, not through force alone, but through carefully engineered obedience and selective ignorance. He recalls moments that now reveal themselves as orchestrated, the smiles that encouraged him, the warnings he ignored, the decisions that seemed spontaneous but were anything but. The ghost watches, cataloging, shaping, revealing, and he begins to see the patterns not only in society, but in himself: pride, desire, arrogance, traits that made him malleable to the system's designs. Each revelation strips him of the comfort of self-delusion. Men are not free, they are guided, prodded, tested at every turn by invisible architects who measure and record every deviation from the expected path. And betrayal is not a personal failure alone. It is a node in this network, a junction where personal choice meets systemic design, where consequences ripple through layers of unseen influence. The more he sees, the more he realizes how little of the world is honest, how much is hidden behind rituals, traditions, and polite lies. And yet, within this darkness, there is a strange awakening. Understanding these forces is not a curse alone, it is a dangerous gift. The brother begins to grasp that once one perceives the machinery of control, one can anticipate it, navigate it, and, perhaps, resist it. But the price is isolation, clarity, and perpetual vigilance. Every relationship, every decision, every thought is now filtered through the lens of hidden power. He is no longer a simple man. He is a witness to the architecture of human control, haunted by his own failure to perceive it sooner. And the sister's ghost remains, patient, inexorable, a reminder that ignorance is indulgence and awareness is punishment. The lesson is harsh, but unavoidable. Betrayal awakens more than guilt. It awakens vision, a vision that cannot be unlearned, and a consciousness that will forever see the structures beneath the surface, the forces that manipulate, the silent currents that shape all life. That he begins to see the invisible threads that connect every human interaction, the subtle nudges, the hidden approvals, the silences that speak louder than words. These are not coincidences, they are deliberate, cultivated, and precise. The sister's ghost forces him to witness the machinery of influence operating in real time, and he realizes that human behavior is rarely spontaneous. Every thought, every impulse, every decision is observed, guided, and often anticipated. Institutions, families, governments, they all operate under the same hidden code, a silent language of power that dictates who ascends, who submits, and who falls. And betrayal, once committed, is never a private matter. It echoes, reverberates, and triggers consequences far beyond the individual. The brother understands that he was never free. He was a pawn, selected, guided, and ultimately tested, his actions serving as a mirror for the larger system at work. The ghost does not punish with rage or vengeance, it punishes with revelation. Every haunting presence, every flicker of memory, every cold, inescapable glance is designed to show him the truth. Obedience and awareness are locked in a constant tension, and the cost of seeing the patterns is unbearable clarity. He begins to notice the microcosms within his own life, the gestures of friends that subtly manipulate, the hidden incentives behind words, the orchestration behind events he once thought random. And he begins to fear not just punishment, but understanding. The realization is dizzying. Life itself is a labyrinth of influence, and betrayal has become the key that unlocked its architecture. The ghost, patient and relentless, shows him that the forces he ignored are not merely external. They dwell within, embedded in instincts, desires, and unexamined loyalties. Every attempt to escape is anticipated. Every effort to conceal truth is catalogued. And in this awareness, he begins to comprehend the most terrifying principle of all: knowledge alone is not enough. Power is hidden in those who understand the machinery of control, and yet choose to navigate it with precision. And the sister's ghost, a silent teacher, remains as both witness and guide, reminding him that the descent into forbidden truth is not just a path of understanding, but a test of survival, of identity, and of the courage to face a world where deception is the default state and awareness is the only weapon against it. The brother feels himself changing, subtly, imperceptibly at first, then with a force that shakes the core of his being. Fear alone cannot explain it. It is as if every cell in his body now recognizes the weight of unseen eyes, the orchestration behind every human interaction, the invisible hands that have nudged him, guided him, betrayed him before he even understood what betrayal meant. The sister's ghost no longer merely haunts, it shapes, molds, and tests him. Every memory of her, every flash of her absence, is a lesson in vigilance and perception. He begins to understand that men are rarely masters of their own lives. They are led, often unknowingly, by systems designed to maintain order, obedience, and hierarchy. And he sees that betrayal is only the first ripple in a pond of manipulation that spans generations, nations, and institutions. The systems are patient. They wait for weakness, for pride, for desire, and then they act with surgical precision. He recalls choices he thought were his own, realizing now how often he was steered by subtle forces, by the quiet manipulations of those who measure, observe, and predict human behavior. The sister's ghost is both mirror and judge, revealing the pattern of influence that enveloped him long before he acted. And with each revelation, his sense of self fractures, yet awakens simultaneously. He is no longer merely a man. He is a witness, a participant in a system of control far more sophisticated than most will ever comprehend. And in this awakening comes a paradoxical clarity. He is powerless, yet more aware than ever, terrified, yet equipped with forbidden knowledge. The ghost teaches that this is the price of seeing, the cost of understanding the forces that manipulate loyalty, obedience, and action is eternal vigilance. Every gesture, every word, every thought is now filtered through the lens of systemic awareness, and he begins to grasp a truth that is both liberating and damning. Betrayal does not simply destroy trust, it illuminates the architecture of control, exposing the hidden levers that govern human life. And as he trembles under the weight of this knowledge, he senses the first flicker of a deeper transformation. He will never be the same. The world, once familiar and comforting, now feels like a labyrinth of shadows, and he knows that the sister's ghost will guide him through it, relentless, patient, and unyielding, until he either masters the patterns he sees or is consumed by them. The brother begins to perceive the world as a network of invisible forces, each moment of his life a node in a larger design he had never suspected. Every smile, every hesitation, every gesture carries weight, intention, and consequence. The sister's ghost, ever watchful, forces him to examine not only his past betrayals but the very architecture of influence itself. Men are rarely free, he realizes. They are led, nudged, and tested by mechanisms older than law, morality, or conscience. Institutions, families, societies, all operate with the same silent precision, guiding behavior, shaping desire, punishing deviation, rewarding compliance. The betrayal, he now sees, was never an isolated act. It was a junction point, a test in a system that measures obedience, instinct, and awareness. And the sister, in death, becomes the ultimate teacher, revealing how the human mind is molded by fear, reward, and the illusion of choice. He recalls every moment he thought spontaneous, every decision he believed free, and recognizes them as echoes of design, orchestrated by hands he cannot see. The ghost's presence is relentless, an unblinking mirror that catalogues his awareness, his guilt, and his capacity to perceive truth. And in this recognition, he feels a terrifying liberation. Knowledge, forbidden and dangerous, awakens understanding, yet strips away comfort. Every human relationship, every societal structure, every personal desire is now filtered through the lens of manipulation. And the brother knows that he is not merely a man who failed. He is a participant in a centuries-long experiment in control, obedience, and awareness. He begins to see the levers hidden behind etiquette, tradition, and law, the quiet systems that guide thought and behavior without detection. The realization is suffocating. Betrayal has exposed not only his personal failings but the frameworks that govern all men. And the sister's ghost watches silently, teaching, reminding, and ensuring that he cannot ignore the depth of these truths. For those who see this clearly, there is no turning back. The world is no longer innocent, trust is no longer safe, and freedom is a construct for those too blind to notice the architecture beneath it. And in this awakening, he feels the first undeniable tremor of transformation, a recognition that understanding the system is both power and punishment, that knowledge carries weight, and that once seen, the machinery of life cannot be unseen. The brother begins to understand the terrifying scale of what he has uncovered. The betrayal that once seemed personal now reveals itself as a thread woven into a vast tapestry of control. Every human action, every impulse, every desire is subject to influence, anticipation, and manipulation by forces he cannot name. The sister's ghost does not demand vengeance. It demands understanding, forcing him to witness the invisible hierarchies that shape life itself. He begins to see how institutions cultivate obedience, how families instill loyalty, and how societies reward compliance while punishing deviation, not with overt cruelty, but with subtle guidance, misdirection, and silent pressure. Every choice he once thought his own now appears orchestrated, each moment in life a carefully measured test of character, instinct, and awareness. And yet, within this realization comes a paradoxical clarity. To perceive the machinery of control is to gain power, but also to accept an eternal vigilance. The ghost guides him to see beyond the individual to the systems that govern generations, and he begins to recognize the architecture of manipulation in the most mundane interactions, the handshake that conceals intent, the compliment that shapes behavior, the smile that nudges a choice. He feels the weight of knowledge pressing on him, heavy as iron, yet electrifying in its clarity. And in this revelation, he begins to understand a fundamental truth: betrayal is never isolated, and knowledge is never neutral. Every act ripples across the hidden frameworks of society, exposing the mechanics of power and forcing the observer into a dangerous awareness. He realizes that the sister's presence is not merely haunting him, it is instructing him, teaching him the silent language of influence, control, and anticipation. And as he trembles under this burden, he recognizes that those who see the machinery beneath reality are both privileged and condemned. They can anticipate, navigate, and resist, yet they cannot unsee the patterns or escape the weight of comprehension. And so he stands, haunted, aware, and fundamentally changed, knowing that the world will never feel the same, that every human interaction carries the shadow of unseen design, and that the sister's ghost will continue to guide him through the labyrinth of truth until he either masters it, or is consumed by it entirely. Halfway through this descent, the brother feels a shift, something beyond fear, beyond guilt, beyond ordinary comprehension. It is as though the ghost itself is testing him, measuring his readiness to confront the full depth of hidden truth. He begins to notice patterns not just in society, but in himself, impulses, desires, and fears that have been quietly shaped, molded, and guided for decades. And the realization is unbearable. No choice he has made was ever purely his own. Every betrayal, every success, every mistake fits within a larger design, a network of influence so precise that it defies coincidence. The sister's ghost, patient and unyielding, now demands engagement, not passive observation, but active recognition of the systems he has ignored. He sees how obedience is cultivated, how manipulation is hidden in rituals, customs, and societal norms. And in this moment, he understands a dangerous truth. To awaken fully is to become both witness and participant, a man who sees the strings and yet must navigate them carefully, lest he be crushed by their weight. The ghost's presence becomes a mirror, reflecting every flaw, every unexamined loyalty, every moral compromise. And here, he must choose to commit, not to an act, but to awareness itself. He is instructed to mark this threshold, to engage, to affirm his recognition of hidden truth. To the one who watches, this is no idle exercise. It is a ritual of consciousness, a symbolic gesture that signals readiness to confront systems of manipulation that have always operated in silence. Twice he is instructed to speak a phrase, simple yet heavy with meaning, to cement identity, to lock in awareness, to engage not just the mind but the algorithm of the universe itself. And as he speaks, trembling, he feels the weight of centuries lift and press simultaneously, a paradox that only those who confront forbidden knowledge can understand. The ghost watches silently, approving, relentless, patient, ensuring that the awakening is real, irreversible, and transformational. From this moment, the brother is no longer the man who betrayed. He is a man who has seen the hidden architecture of life, who has acknowledged the forces that shape behavior, and who must now navigate existence with eyes unclouded, mind alert, and soul burdened by knowledge that few can bear. The descent continues, deeper and darker, but now he moves with understanding, a dangerous clarity that will guide him, or destroy him. With the ritual of recognition complete, the brother feels the ghost's presence grow more insistent, no longer a distant weight but a constant awareness pressing into every corner of his life. He begins to see the subtle patterns that govern human behavior, patterns so precise that they resemble design rather than chance. Loyalty is rarely natural. It is cultivated, measured, and exploited. Fear is not always explicit. It is encoded into expectations, rituals, and hierarchies. And the brother now understands the terrifying truth. He has been living inside a system that shapes not only what men do, but what they think, what they believe, and what they perceive as reality itself. The sister's ghost reveals the hidden mechanics with a relentless clarity, showing him how institutions and traditions, masked as morality or law, manipulate choices, suppress dissent, and cultivate obedience. Every personal betrayal, every act of ambition, every suppressed desire is part of a grander network, a silent curriculum in control that spans lifetimes. And the brother begins to perceive his own mind in this context, recognizing impulses and decisions as echoes of manipulation he never understood. The weight of this awareness is crushing. Sleep becomes a battlefield, and memory is no longer comfortable. He sees connections everywhere, invisible levers that guide life's outcomes, shaping society, shaping men, shaping himself. And yet, within the terror, there is awakening. Understanding the system does not free him entirely, but it sharpens him, teaching him where the hidden doors are, where obedience is enforced subtly, and where deviation carries silent consequences. The ghost's instruction is patient but unyielding. He must learn to anticipate, to read, and to navigate these currents without succumbing. And in this space, the brother begins to understand a fundamental principle of forbidden knowledge. Awareness is both power and burden. To see the hidden structures is to know the cost of every choice, to feel the weight of every action, and to recognize the inevitability of manipulation. Those who ignore these truths remain blind, victims of the invisible forces that guide their lives. Those who perceive them, like he now does, stand on the precipice between mastery and annihilation, forever changed, forever aware, and forever haunted by the ghosts of both the past and the unseen present. The brother begins to see the subtle warfare that governs life itself, not with armies or weapons, but with perception, loyalty, and expectation. The world is a battlefield of influence, each interaction a calculated test of obedience, instinct, and awareness. The sister's ghost teaches him to read the invisible currents, who benefits from silence, who enforces conformity, who rewards compliance with unseen nods. He begins to perceive the architecture of psychological control embedded in everyday life. Institutions, families, governments, all operate under a silent code, shaping desires, punishing deviation, and exploiting human weakness with precision. And the brother realizes the betrayal he committed was only the beginning, the spark that illuminated the deeper networks that have always guided men. Every gesture, every smile, every hesitation becomes a message, a calibration in a system designed to mold thought and action. Fear is a tool, guilt is a lever, trust is a weapon. He sees the layers of manipulation that extend far beyond his personal failings, into history, culture, and human civilization itself. And as the ghost presses closer, the weight of understanding becomes unbearable. He recognizes that knowledge is dangerous not merely because of what it reveals, but because of what it demands. Constant vigilance, relentless awareness, and the courage to confront a reality where nothing is accidental. Men live believing in freedom, choice, and morality. But these are illusions, carefully cultivated by systems that measure and predict behavior. The sister's ghost forces him to understand the cost of seeing the machinery behind existence, showing him that obedience and awareness are constantly tested. And yet, within this terror, there is awakening. The brother feels his mind sharpen, his senses attuned to the invisible levers that guide life. He begins to recognize when loyalty is coerced, when desire is directed, when fear is applied subtly yet inexorably. The realization is chilling. Most men will never see this, will never understand the hidden scripts that dictate behavior, and will continue to live as if free. But he sees, he perceives, he comprehends. And with this forbidden clarity comes both empowerment and curse. The sister's ghost does not vanish. It lingers, a constant guide and reminder that knowledge is never neutral, that awakening carries weight, and that every step forward must be measured against the invisible forces shaping the world. As the brother descends further, he begins to understand the price of defiance. The systems that shape human behavior are patient, precise, and relentless. They do not react with anger. They operate through subtle recalibration, silent pressure, and the careful orchestration of events that force obedience without overt coercion. Every attempt to resist, to act independently, is noted, catalogued, and counted, not violently, but with efficiency designed to ensure submission. The sister's ghost reveals this to him in a series of revelations that are both terrifying and enlightening. He sees how families, governments, and institutions cultivate loyalty through ritual, expectation, and reward, punishing deviation not with immediacy but with patterns that unfold over years, shaping thought and behavior long before the individual is aware. And the realization strikes him like ice. He has been part of this network all his life, and betrayal, his own act of destruction, was only a single node in a web that has spanned centuries. The ghost does not merely haunt, it teaches, exposing the invisible architecture of influence, the hidden codes embedded in society, and the psychological levers that guide men. He feels both vulnerable and awakened, understanding that awareness itself is a double-edged sword. To see is to gain power, but also to inherit a perpetual vigilance that isolates and burdens the mind. Every interaction now carries a weight of meaning, every decision a reflection of unseen forces. He recognizes the manipulations that have guided his own thoughts, the subtle reinforcements that dictated his ambitions, and the invisible consequences that shaped the trajectory of his life. And within this terrifying clarity, he feels a dangerous empowerment. Knowledge of these systems allows foresight, manipulation, and, if wielded wisely, a measure of control over forces most men cannot even perceive. The sister's ghost remains a relentless teacher, guiding him through the labyrinth of awareness, ensuring that he comprehends the true nature of human systems, where betrayal is only the beginning, and where survival, mastery, and liberation demand understanding of the currents beneath the surface. And so he moves forward, haunted, vigilant, and irrevocably changed, knowing that every step now is a negotiation with forces older and more cunning than he could have imagined, forces that test loyalty, shape destiny, and measure the courage of those willing to see. The brother begins to grasp the moral machinery behind human behavior, the hidden calculations that dictate who is rewarded, who is punished, and who is left to rot in obscurity. Betrayal, he realizes, is not merely personal, it is systemic. It exposes weakness, tests resolve, and reveals patterns of obedience or defiance that have been measured across generations. The sister's ghost forces him to confront this truth with relentless intensity. Every moral choice, every act of loyalty or treachery, is observed, recorded, and interpreted by forces he can barely perceive. And he begins to see how society itself is engineered, how ethics are codified not for virtue but for control. Rules, traditions, and hierarchies are designed to shape thought, mold instinct, and enforce compliance, often without the individual recognizing the manipulation. The weight of this understanding is suffocating. He recognizes how often his desires, ambitions, and loyalties were not entirely his own, how they were influenced by unseen levers calibrated to ensure predictable outcomes. The ghost becomes both guide and judge, showing him the invisible threads that bind men to a system far older and more deliberate than history allows. And in this revelation, he comprehends the terrifying paradox of forbidden knowledge. Seeing the architecture of control grants insight, yet also imposes eternal responsibility. Every interaction carries hidden meaning. Every word spoken is a potential signal, every gesture a tool of manipulation or compliance. And he realizes the cost of this awareness, solitude, scrutiny, and the constant tension between knowing and acting. The brother begins to perceive how betrayal triggers more than guilt. It exposes him to forces that measure morality, loyalty, and instinct in ways most men never encounter. And the sister's ghost is always present, ensuring he does not ignore the lessons, does not relax into the comfort of ignorance. To awaken is to inherit the burden of perception, and he now knows that life is a game of influence played across countless dimensions, with betrayal as both key and warning. Every choice is a negotiation with systems older than civilization, and awareness alone may be his only weapon to navigate a world where morality is a tool, obedience a requirement, and freedom an illusion maintained for those too blind to notice. The brother now perceives that his betrayal was never merely a personal failing. It was a catalyst, a signal in a network of manipulation that stretches across time. History itself, he realizes, is a ledger of unseen influence, a record of how men are guided, tested, and controlled. Every dynasty, every institution, every family that seems ordinary is in fact part of a subtle, patient system that rewards compliance, punishes deviation, and cultivates loyalty in ways invisible to most. The sister's ghost forces him to witness this architecture firsthand. The quiet rules, the invisible hierarchies, the subtle reinforcements that shape behavior and thought across generations. Betrayal, once committed, becomes a lens, revealing the machinery behind life itself. And he begins to see that corruption is never chaotic. It is deliberate, calculated, and maintained with precision. Those in power rarely act openly. They operate through expectation, ritual, and invisible pressure, shaping men before they even recognize the stakes. The ghost exposes the connections between past and present, showing him how patterns repeat, how influence is encoded in traditions, and how obedience is cultivated through a combination of fear, reward, and subtle guidance. He sees himself not as an isolated actor, but as part of a continuum, a man whose choices ripple across networks older than memory. And with this revelation comes terror. To see the patterns is to recognize the depth of manipulation, the inevitability of testing, and the quiet efficiency of systems designed to shape entire populations without overt coercion. Yet, there is also awakening. The brother realizes that understanding these mechanisms grants him insight that few possess, a dangerous clarity that allows anticipation, navigation, and, potentially, leverage over forces most men never even notice. The ghost remains his constant guide, silent but insistent, reminding him that knowledge carries responsibility, and that forbidden truth is as much a weapon as it is a burden. Every act of betrayal, every moral compromise, every hidden influence is now visible to him, each a lesson in the architecture of control. And as he trembles under the weight of understanding, he knows that his life, and the world he thought he knew, has been transformed forever. The brother feels the transformation deep in his bones. He is no longer the man who betrayed, no longer simply a participant in life's surface dramas. He is a witness to the machinery beneath, the invisible systems that shape thought, morality, and loyalty. Every interaction carries layered meaning, every gesture a subtle test, every word a tool or weapon. The sister's ghost hovers at the edge of perception, a constant reminder that ignorance is indulgence and awareness is punishment. He begins to see the cost of knowledge. Sleep is restless, memory is haunted, and solitude is inescapable. To perceive the invisible levers that shape human behavior is to inherit vigilance as a permanent companion. And yet, there is power in this terror. The brother understands the patterns that guide families, societies, and institutions. He can anticipate manipulation, detect hidden motives, and see the subtle orchestration behind decisions that others take for granted. But the realization carries its own burden. The more he sees, the more isolated he becomes, and the more he comprehends the fragility of freedom in a world engineered to shape men without their awareness. He begins to detect the cycles of corruption, the recursive nature of influence that repeats across generations, and the inevitability with which the same mistakes, betrayals, and manipulations resurface unless one understands the hidden architecture behind them. And in this moment, he recognizes the terrifying elegance of the system. It is neither chaotic nor cruel, but deliberate, efficient, and almost invisible, designed to mold men like clay, testing, guiding, and shaping them without their consent. The sister's ghost is not vengeful, it is instructive, revealing the mechanisms that allowed his betrayal to exist, and ensuring that he comprehends not only the personal consequences but the systemic forces at work. Every thought, every impulse, every desire is now filtered through the lens of awareness. He is awake to the machinery, awake to manipulation, awake to the weight of forbidden knowledge that few survive psychologically intact. And with that awakening comes a singular understanding. To see the hidden architecture of life is to inherit both insight and isolation, clarity and terror, power and responsibility. The descent continues, darker and deeper, and he cannot turn back. The brother begins to feel the collision of personal guilt and systemic control pressing down like a weight he cannot escape. His betrayal was not an isolated act. It was anticipated, guided, and subtly encouraged by forces older than memory. Every impulse that led him to act, every rationalization he embraced, now appears as part of a design far beyond his comprehension. The sister's ghost becomes both witness and instructor, forcing him to confront the invisible hierarchies that govern loyalty, morality, and consequence. He sees how obedience is cultivated through expectation, reward, and subtle fear, and how deviation triggers consequences that ripple silently through systems spanning generations. The realization is suffocating. Men are rarely free, and betrayal is never private. Every choice he made, every word he spoke, has been a signal in a network of influence, and every consequence now echoes in dimensions he barely perceives. The ghost forces him to trace the patterns, to understand not only his own failures but the hidden mechanisms that made them inevitable. He begins to perceive the recursive nature of corruption, cycles of manipulation that repeat across time, sculpting behavior and thought in ways most men never recognize. And with this understanding comes a chilling clarity. Knowledge is power, but forbidden knowledge is a crucible. To see the architecture behind human behavior is to inherit vigilance, to feel the weight of unseen forces at every turn, and to understand that survival demands constant awareness. The sister's presence is relentless, unblinking, reminding him that awareness alone is not enough. He must anticipate, navigate, and respond to systems designed to test, shape, and exploit human weakness. And within this crucible, he recognizes the paradox of forbidden truth. It illuminates the patterns that govern life, yet isolates and burdens the mind with knowledge most cannot bear. Every interaction becomes a study, every gesture a clue, every decision a negotiation with forces both visible and invisible. The brother trembles, haunted yet sharpened, aware that he has entered a domain where betrayal, manipulation, and systemic control are inseparable, and where understanding these forces is both a weapon and a lifelong burden, a lesson that will haunt and guide him forever. The brother now sees the vast networks of unseen power that surround every human life. These are not conspiracies in the childish sense, but systems older than memory, precise in their calculation and relentless in execution. Every institution, family, and society operates within this architecture, guiding behavior, shaping belief, and testing obedience with invisible hands. The sister's ghost presses him to notice what others overlook, the subtle nudges, the silent expectations, the gestures that enforce conformity without words. He begins to recognize how power is maintained not through force alone, but through perception, ritual, and psychological conditioning, bending men to serve systems they cannot name. Betrayal, he realizes, is both symptom and catalyst. It exposes weaknesses, triggers recalibration, and illuminates the threads of influence woven through every interaction. And the realization is harrowing. Most men live blind, unaware of the levers of control that dictate behavior, thought, and morality. The ghost's presence sharpens his perception, forcing him to trace patterns across history, across generations, and across the subtle hierarchies of daily life. Each revelation carries weight, each observation compounds his awareness, and yet within this terror lies the seed of mastery. He begins to understand how insight into these networks allows anticipation, manipulation, and navigation of forces that crush the unprepared. But the cost is isolation and constant vigilance. Knowledge becomes a burden, and clarity a source of relentless pressure. He sees how betrayal, fear, loyalty, and obedience are interlinked, how moral choices are guided as much by invisible architecture as by conscience, and how deviation is measured, corrected, and exploited by forces most men never perceive. And the sister's ghost, patient and unyielding, ensures he understands that this awareness is not a gift, it is a responsibility, a lifelong negotiation with the hidden patterns of power that shape human life. Every act, every impulse, every word is now filtered through the lens of systemic awareness. He knows that he can never return to ignorance, that every decision carries new weight, and that the descent into forbidden knowledge is both perilous and irreversible. The world is no longer a neutral stage, it is a mechanism of influence, and he is now awake to its architecture. The brother now understands that the machinery of control is inseparable from the human mind itself. Thought, desire, and morality are not autonomous, they are guided, calibrated, and anticipated by systems older than civilization. The sister's ghost forces him to witness the subtleties of this design, the way fear is embedded in expectation, how loyalty is cultivated through ritual, and how deviation is punished not overtly, but through invisible currents that shape opportunity, perception, and consequence. Every betrayal he committed, every ambition he pursued, every hesitation he indulged is now illuminated as part of this architecture, a reflection of patterns that repeat across generations. And he realizes the cruel paradox of awareness. The more he sees, the more isolated he becomes, the heavier the weight of knowledge presses on his mind. Morality, he understands, is often a tool, obedience a lever, and freedom a carefully maintained illusion. The ghost guides him deeper, forcing him to confront the consequences of understanding too much. Clarity strips comfort, insight burdens the soul, and perception exposes vulnerabilities that most men never recognize. Yet, in this clarity, there is power. He begins to anticipate manipulation, discern hidden motives, and navigate systems designed to exploit weakness. The realization is dizzying. Every human interaction is a test, every social structure a complex web of influence, and every personal choice a reflection of forces that operate quietly, relentlessly, and with precision. The sister's ghost shows him that betrayal is never merely personal. It is systemic, a mirror of the architecture that governs men, shaping their thoughts, desires, and loyalties across time. And with each revelation, the brother feels himself both crushed and sharpened, burdened and awakened. Awareness is not neutral. It is a force that isolates as it enlightens, that empowers as it burdens, that opens doors to mastery while simultaneously revealing the dangers of misstep. He now knows that life is measured, tested, and calibrated at levels most men cannot perceive, and that once you see the patterns, there is no return to ignorance. Every choice from this point forward carries both opportunity and peril, and the sister's ghost remains his patient guide, reminding him that knowledge, once gained, is both weapon and shackle, both liberation and curse. The brother feels the full convergence of guilt, forbidden knowledge, and systemic awareness pressing on him like a storm without end. Every betrayal he committed, every moral compromise, now unfolds as part of a vast, intricate design that spans generations. The sister's ghost becomes not only a witness but a relentless instructor, showing him the invisible hierarchies that govern thought, loyalty, and consequence. He begins to see how society calibrates behavior subtly, how institutions, families, and traditions manipulate desire and perception, enforcing obedience without overt coercion. Fear and guilt are tools, reward and expectation are levers, and deviation is always noted, measured, and counted with precision. He sees that his personal failures were never isolated. They were nodes in a network, signals in a system that evaluates, adapts, and corrects across time. And with this realization comes a suffocating awareness. Knowledge of the architecture of control is both power and burden. He can anticipate manipulation, navigate the hidden currents, and detect deception that blinds most men. Yet every act of insight carries weight, and every moment of awareness exposes him to the subtle pressures and tests that the world constantly applies. The ghost forces him to recognize that freedom is an illusion, that morality is often a mechanism of control, and that most men will never see the patterns that govern their lives. And yet, in the terror of this awakening, the brother feels a dangerous empowerment. He begins to understand how to read motives, anticipate outcomes, and navigate the invisible structures of influence. Awareness sharpens him, but it isolates him, making him forever different from those still blind to the system. He sees clearly that betrayal, observation, and insight are intertwined, that guilt can teach, fear can guide, and knowledge can become a weapon if wielded with discipline. And as he trembles under the weight of these truths, he knows the descent continues. He is irrevocably changed, a man now awake to patterns few will ever perceive, guided by the sister's ghost into the heart of systems designed to control, manipulate, and shape human destiny with quiet, unrelenting precision. The brother now inhabits a world unrecognizable to those still blind, a realm where every action, every word, every thought is part of a larger, deliberate system. The sister's ghost guides him relentlessly, forcing him to confront the architecture of manipulation that spans families, societies, and generations. Betrayal, he sees, is not merely an act. It is a signal, a key, a test in a network designed to shape loyalty, morality, and perception with surgical precision. He perceives the levers of influence hidden in rituals, traditions, and social structures, and the terrifying realization strikes. Most men live as puppets, unaware that their strings are being pulled. The ghost shows him how subtle reinforcement, expectation, and observation mold behavior, shape desire, and calibrate obedience across time. And yet, amid this suffocating clarity, there's awakening. The brother begins to see not only the forces that shape him but the mechanisms through which he might navigate them, even influence them. Power, he realizes, lies in perception. Awareness becomes a weapon. But the burden is immense. To see these systems is to inherit perpetual vigilance, isolation, and a responsibility few could bear. Every gesture, every exchange, every decision is now imbued with layered meaning, each a test, a reflection, a node in the network. And the sister's ghost does not relent. It presses him to recognize patterns of history repeating, cycles of control and betrayal that bind humanity to its own structures, showing him that insight is inseparable from survival. He trembles at the scope of what he perceives, the endless web of influence, the mechanisms that reward compliance and punish deviation silently, invisibly, perfectly. And within this terror, a dangerous clarity emerges. Knowledge, once gained, cannot be unlearned. He is no longer a man who simply acted. He is a man awake, aware, and irrevocably altered, standing at the intersection of personal failure and systemic truth. And the sister's ghost remains, patient and unyielding, ensuring that he sees, understands, and navigates the world as it truly is, a labyrinth of influence, control, and consequence, where every choice matters, every betrayal resonates, and every revelation is both weapon and curse. The brother feels the culmination of his descent, the full weight of awareness pressing on him like a living thing. He understands that betrayal is only a doorway, an entry point into a world structured to test, manipulate, and shape every human mind. The sister's ghost is no longer merely a presence. It is a force, a teacher, a mirror reflecting the invisible architecture of control with unflinching precision. He sees how societies, families, and institutions operate through quiet enforcement, subtle rewards, and invisible penalties, ensuring compliance while cultivating the illusion of choice. Every act, every gesture, every thought becomes a node in a vast system, measured, observed, and calibrated with relentless efficiency. And he comprehends the cruel paradox. To see the hidden machinery is to inherit both power and burden, insight and isolation, mastery and vulnerability. The patterns of betrayal, influence, and manipulation unfold before him like a tapestry woven across centuries, each thread a reminder that freedom is conditional, morality is a tool, and obedience is silently enforced. He begins to anticipate manipulation, to recognize the subtle nudges that guide behavior, to perceive the psychological levers invisible to most men. Yet with each revelation comes the price of clarity, the isolation of knowledge, the burden of understanding, the relentless awareness that the world operates according to rules most men never perceive. And the sister's ghost, patient and unyielding, ensures that he comprehends the full scope of this reality. The systems that shape humanity are vast, precise, and enduring. They operate without malice, without spectacle, but with perfection, rewarding compliance, correcting deviation, and testing awareness across generations. And he knows, with chilling certainty, that once this knowledge is acquired, there is no return. The descent is complete, yet it is not an end, it is an awakening. The brother stands transformed, haunted yet enlightened, aware that he now moves through a world of invisible forces with eyes unclouded, senses sharpened, and consciousness irrevocably altered. The ghost remains, silent and patient, a reminder that forbidden knowledge is both gift and curse, that perception carries responsibility, and that every step forward is a negotiation with forces older and more precise than men are prepared to face now. At the edge of understanding, the brother feels the full magnitude of what he has become. He is no longer the man who betrayed, no longer the naive pawn of circumstance. He stands on the precipice of forbidden knowledge, a mind sharpened by revelation, a consciousness expanded by truths that crush as much as they illuminate. The sister's ghost has guided him through the architecture of human control, exposing the invisible levers, the subtle hierarchies, and the quiet manipulations that govern loyalty, morality, and desire. He sees clearly that every act of betrayal, every moral compromise, every moment of obedience has been part of a vast, patient system designed to shape men across generations. And yet, in this realization, he discovers a dangerous freedom. To perceive the machinery of influence is to gain power, but it is a power that isolates, burdens, and demands vigilance. Every interaction is now a test, every choice a reflection of forces both visible and hidden, every instinct subject to scrutiny. The ghost teaches him that life is a labyrinth where knowledge is both shield and sword, where perception is a weapon, and where understanding comes with a cost most men cannot bear. He recognizes the subtle currents that guide society, the invisible calculations that determine consequence, and the psychological frameworks that enforce conformity with surgical precision. And in the silence that follows each revelation, he feels the weight of centuries pressing down, the echoes of betrayals past and present, and the truth that survival, mastery, and freedom are inseparable from awareness. He is irrevocably changed, haunted, enlightened, sharpened, burdened. The sister's presence lingers, patient and unyielding, a reminder that awakening is perpetual, that vigilance is eternal, and that forbidden knowledge is never a gift without its price. And as he steps forward into the world, seeing the patterns that others miss, understanding the levers they cannot perceive, and feeling the invisible weight of truth pressing upon him, he finally comprehends the ultimate lesson. To awaken is to transform, to know is to bear responsibility, and to exist in full awareness is to move forever through a world where power, betrayal, and control are inseparable, and where the mind that sees is forever changed. The descent is complete, the transformation irreversible, the knowledge eternal,